extending them. Don't further hamstring us. Don't tie our hands. Don't allow additional regulatory oversight for the various agencies that are helping to create the problem. And we'll have a better clean water society, we'll have a better environment, we'll have a better America, and as a result we will have the jobs that we want. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Montana yields back his time. Gentlewoman from Wyoming.
I move to strike the last word.
Gentlewoman from Wyoming is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to oppose the amendment and to support the underlying bill. Water rights are a state issue, and this amendment would allow two federal agencies to increase their own scope of jurisdiction pursuant to the Clean Water Act. Those agencies have acknowledged that this amendment would allow them to increase the scope of their jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act. It is not that non-navigable waters go without regulation. Non-navigable waters are regulated. They are regulated in the states by state systems. In the state of Wyoming, that system is a regulatory system administered by the executive branch. In Colorado, that system is an adjudicatory system regulated through the courts. But in every case, in the West, where water is precious and sparse, the people who control it, whether it is in my state like the Board of Control and our 4 regions and our water commissioners, our superintendents, our ditch riders, our ranchers, our farmers, our Division of Department of Environmental Quality, they know the names of the streams, they know the names of the people who interact with the streams, the livestock that interacts with the streams, the wildlife that interacts with the streams, the weeds, the crops, the grass. They understand these ecosystems. State government has been regulating water for over a century in a very comprehensive, clear, boots on the ground, understand the systems way of managing. Now, if you take that and allow the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers to expand their jurisdiction in a way that includes non-navigable waters, it will take that regulatory scheme that is working so well and it will bring it to Washington, 2,000 miles away from where the regulators are currently doing their jobs well every day, and put it right here in Washington, D.C., where people don't understand the scarcity of water, where people don't understand our regulatory schemes, where they don't understand our case law, where they don't understand our ditch riders, where they don't understand our superintendents, where they don't understand our boards of control, they don't understand our state engineers. Under the Western Attorneys General Conference, there is a specific entity related to the state engineers. The state engineers in the West are the people who regulate water. They meet regularly to discuss interstate issues in water jurisdiction as well as intrastate issues. This is a well-regulated, well-understood, well-managed, well-articulated system. To take it and decide the federal government for no good reason could do better at a time when the federal government is broke and we cannot expand its jurisdiction without costing the taxpayers needlessly more, is a travesty, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlewoman from Wyoming yields back her time. Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I too rise to oppose this amendment offered by my friend from Virginia. Amendment offered in my mind to protect this administration's overreach on regulating all bodies of water in this country. As my friend from Montana alluded to, this really is a job-killing amendment. Section 109 of the Energy and Water Development Appropriations Bill puts a check on this administration's proposed guidance on Clean Water Act regulations. Mr. Chairman, at a time when unemployment exceeds 9%, this so-called guidance document, from my point of view, being from the West, will undermine economic growth. It will increase permitting requirements and undoubtedly lead to more litigation. According to the American Farm Bureau, this guidance document would, and I quote, would take an overly broad view of waters of the United States and would serve as a roadmap to designate nearly all bodies of water, even some dry land, as subject to federal regulation that dictates land use decisions, and I end quote. Mr. Chairman, water is a precious commodity, especially to those of us in the West. It is a necessary resource for many activities, including agriculture, energy, transportation, and recreation. Our economy and way of life cannot afford to have the federal government claim control over all waterways in this country. This administration's attempt to enact such draconian regulations through regulatory fiat is a deliberate attempt to circumvent Congress. As many of my colleagues know, the prior Congress could not pass an overly restrictive renewal of the Clean Water Act. So it's clear that this part of the regulatory agenda is aimed at picking up the pieces that the Congress could not enact last time. And so it's for this reason that I joined 169 of my colleagues in April of 2010 to urge both the EPA and the Corps of Engineers to withdraw these proposed guidance regulations. That was in April of 2010. Unfortunately, this administration refuses to do so. So that is why Section 109 is so important to protect the rural America from this overzealous bureaucracies. And for that reason, Mr. Chairman, I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I yield back my time.
The gentleman from Washington yields back his time. There's a gentleman from Indiana.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 5 minutes.
Sure, appreciate the recognition, and I rise in strong support of the gentleman's amendment. Without this amendment, the bill would result in increased implementation costs to both the federal and state resource agencies, as well as to the regulated community. Increased delays in the implementation of important public works projects and protracted litigation on the disparity between existing federal regulations and the two court decisions. Clearly, the Army Corps of Engineers cannot exceed its congressional authority. But it's certainly necessary that the law and regulations be clarified given the Supreme Court decision. There is a purpose to the Clean Water Act. It is to protect the nation's waterways. And all of the environmental and economic benefits of these aquatic ecosystems are at risk if some elements are protected and others are not. We certainly need to make sure that the definitions are predictable and manageable. The definition of waters protected by the Clean Water Act should be clear, understandable, well-supported, and transparent to the public. I am concerned if the language currently in the bill is not removed, that will not be the case. And certainly need to promote consistency between the Clean Water Act and agricultural wetland programs. We need the identification of waters covered by the Clean Water Act and the Food Security Act, and operational elements of implementing programs should reflect consistent, predictable, and straightforward decision guidelines. We ought to be precise on exemptions as well. My further concern is that the provision now contained in the bill does not apply simply to the coming fiscal year. It applies to any subsequent Energy and Water Development Act, ensuring uncertainty continues indefinitely. And so I am in strong support of the gentleman's amendment and would be willing to yield time to him.
Gentleman from Virginia.
I thank my very good friend, the ranking member of Energy and Water Appropriations. Let me first address the points that were made by my very good friend from Montana. First of all, there was a suggestion that there was sewage dumped into the Potomac River. I think that's pretty much a quote. That's not accurate, I would say to my very good friend. It was not sewage. It was clean, filtered silt that came from a drinking water reservoir that was put into the Potomac without any threat to the quality of the water or the habitat. The Corps of Engineers understood that. They don't now put it there, but I don't think it's quite accurate to describe in the way that it was. With regard to the Supreme Court ruling, even Justice Scalia made it clear that waters that are adjacent to navigable waters should be federally regulated and protected. So the statement that was offered in the debate is not entirely accurate. I would also mention that EPA does have an office in Montana, and in fact, the people who were adversely affected by the oil pipeline leak that put a considerable amount of oil into the Yellowstone River, they are saying that EPA was wonderful, tremendously helpful to them. And that's what EPA wants to be now, not only to individual communities adversely affected, but to the businesses, to the mining interests, to the farming interests that need clarification on what waters are appropriately under federal jurisdiction. Let me now yield back my time to the distinguished gentleman from Indiana.
Gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
My time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from
Mr.
Nebraska.
Chairman, move to strike the last word.
Gentleman from Nebraska is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I want to yield my time to the gentleman from Montana.
I thank the gentleman from Nebraska. And no, the point is there was more than just clean water dropped in to the Potomac. It was done in the dead of the night. It would not have needed to be done in the dead of the night if it was being done legally or above board. And if you want to talk about the oil spill in Montana, the Yellowstone River is, in fact, a navigable stream. Yes, in fact, the EPA did a good job. No, in fact, we haven't, to my knowledge yet, and that is still yet to be open to interpretation because we're waiting. There has been no loss of life among the fish. We'll wait and see. Certainly some of the ramifications will be down the road as a result of the studies that occur, and we do appreciate the EPA coming in. But again, it was a navigable stream. And this amendment strips what we are trying to do to protect non-navigable from being expanded beyond the original intent.
Will the gentleman yield just for a question?
Certainly.
The gentleman talks about the Potomac. I've been here for many, many years. I was on the staff in the other body, and at the time, and this was probably in the mid-'70s, when what the gentleman says was an issue.
No.
Now, I'm not talking. What time frame are you talking about?
If the gentleman will allow me to reclaim the gentleman's time. No, this was
more recent?
Yeah, this was in the year 2000.
I'm just going to say the reason we got the thing cleaned up was because of the Clean Water Act. That's how the Columbia. No. That's how the Columbia. The Potomac got cleaned up. I yield back.
With the gentleman.
No, the issue was not as a result of the Clean Water Act being established to clean up the various rivers around the country. The issue had to do with specifically the Potomac and the discharges that occurred within the Potomac. And those of us from the Western Caucus in 2001, which is when I first got to Congress, were trying to make the issue of the hypocrisy between the Eastern constituency, the urban constituency of Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Maryland, trying to apply a different standard to Montana. So the issue was specific to the discharge in the Potomac, and it was specific to the Wilson Bridge and an endangered species and the hypocrisy of two separate interpretations. The Supreme Court has made an interpretation that the agencies are going too far. We agree with it. The language in the bill agrees with it. This amendment is a bad amendment, and I hope you vote no. I yield back.
I yield back my time.
Yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Washington.
I move to strike the requisite number of words, and I yield to the gentleman
is recognized.
from Virginia.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
I thank the gentleman. I'm not going to belabor this, but I do think, for the record, we should clarify. Some of what the gentleman said is accurate, except for the material. This was not sewerage. This was filtered silt that came from a drinking water reservoir at Dale Carlia that is operated by the Corps of Engineers. They did put it into the Potomac after verifying that it would not jeopardize the health of the fish or any of the vegetation, and they did seek an exemption. They lost, and now that silt is put in a landfill. So
the gentleman,
yes,
I'd like to ask the gentleman a question. Yeah. Does the gentleman not believe, as I do, that the Potomac River is far better today in terms of water quality because of the Clean Water Act?
There's no question if the gentleman would yield back, there's no question that the Clean Water Act is responsible for the health, such as it is, of the Potomac River. There was a time when you could almost strike a match and light the Potomac River on fire. There was so much pollution in it.
There were rivers,
debris,
particularly in Pennsylvania, where they in fact did that. And it was lit on fire. And then the Clean Water Act was passed by Congress, and guess who signed it? Richard Milhouse Nixon. He signed that bill. He signed the Clean Air Act, the Environmental Policy Act. I mean, in those days, there were Republicans who cared about the environment.
Bill Ruckelshaus.
Bill Agee.
Yes.
So, I mean, to hear this rant over there about the Clean Water Act is really despicable. And this amendment, your amendment, would improve it, would protect the environment, clarify these Supreme Court decisions so that we can get on with it and to make the waters of our country fishable, swimmable, and clean up. Yes, I will yield to the distinguished chairman of the Natural Resources Committee.
I appreciate my friend from Washington yielding. This amendment is not about the Clean Water Act. This amendment is about a bureaucratic guidance on an issue that this Congress attempted to take up last time, that simply, among other things, said that the jurisdiction of the Clean Water Act would not be navigable waters. Now, that causes a whole lot of us in the West a lot of problems, and coming from an irrigation area, it bothers me because that means the federal government would now be in charge of everything not navigable, which could be irrigation streams.
Regaining my time, I would just say to the gentleman, why don't you, as chairman of, do you have jurisdiction over this, or is this Commerce Committee?
This is Transportation.
It's which one?
Transportation.
Transportation. Well, you know, you guys are in the majority now. You're chairman of a major committee. Why don't you have your committee system hold a hearing? We don't, you know, the fact is, what you're trying to do in this appropriations bill is so egregious that we have to use an amendment to fix it.
Well, the gentleman would yield.
Yes, I yield.
Listen, my issue is not, the issue for me is not the Clean Water Act. The issue was an attempt to amend the Clean Water Act to take out navigable, and that's what is being done by potentially by the guidance with this bureaucracy. That's what this amendment.
Yeah. Taking back my time, again, the regulatory process hasn't even been completed. People are still sending in comments, and so to use a blunt tool and put this prohibition in here doesn't allow the process to work to make sure we can clarify the Supreme Court decision.
If the gentleman would yield.
Yes, if I have time. Do I have time? Yes, I yield to the gentleman.
Has time remaining. The gentleman from Virginia is
I would like to underscore what the distinguished ranking member of the Full Appropriations Committee has said. This amendment prevents guidance and rulemaking. It's that comprehensive. What EPA and the Corps of Engineers are trying to do is to clarify where federal jurisdiction extends and where it ends. There is clearly confusion on what constitutes navigable waters. The Supreme Court recognized that. Even Justice Scalia said it's not just navigable waters, it's waters that are contiguous, and there are any number of water sources that are under the surface that you can't see. Most of the water in this country is under the surface. It can be under land, it's under water.
beginning my time, just for a
Please.
second. The gentleman may be better off in the long term by letting the process work, and if it does then clarify between navigable and non-navigable, that would be important to the gentleman from
If
Washington.
the gentleman yield,
I yield, yes.
the law is clear. It only says navigable. That's what the law says right now. Now, that's where the danger comes.
Time's
let's-
expired. The time's
Let's work
expired.
together to clarify it.
The gentleman's time's expired. Does any other member wish to seek time to speak to the gentleman from Virginia's amendment? If not, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia, and those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. The gentleman from Virginia.
We request a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia will be postponed. Clerk will read.
Page 14, line 12, Section 110. None of the funds may be used to relocate any regional division headquarters of the Corps located at a military installation. Section 111. Section 5 of the
Madam
Act
Chairman, I
is
have an amendment at the desk.
The gentleman from Nebraska. Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Terry of Nebraska. At the end of Title I, insert the following section. Not later than 1 year after the date of enactment of this Act, the Army Corps of Engineers shall conduct and publish the results of a study regarding the reasons and contributing factors that led to the abnormal flooding of the Missouri River during the spring and summer of 2011, with specific focus on whether the water management activities of the Corps conducted for any purpose other than flood prevention and control contributed to the 2011 flooding, and in what ways.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
Madam Chairman, I reserve a point of order on the gentleman's amendment.
The point of order is reserved. The gentleman from Nebraska.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I rise today with this amendment to the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill. This amendment would direct the Army Corps of Engineers to conduct and publish a study regarding the flooding of the Missouri River this year. We need to know why this flooding occurred, particularly if our flood control system was utilized for purposes other than flood prevention, so we can prevent this from happening in the future. Let me be clear. I would assume that the Corps of Engineers in charge of flood control would be doing an annual study of whether or not they are succeeding in their legislative mandated goals, the whole purposes of the dams along the river. So, we're just simply asking them to do what they should be doing anyway, especially when this is such an interesting, well, strike the word interesting, devastating year based on the miscalculations of the Corps of Engineers. As I'm standing here now, the Missouri is flooding in 5 states, including Nebraska and Iowa. In my own district, I have constituents damaged, underwater, wiped out. As we stand here, we are wondering if our levees are going to hold back the water, preventing downtown Omaha from being flooded. This is a 90-day sustained flood. It's entitled the Great Missouri River Flood of 2011. Not to recede until maybe October or November. Anyone who lives near a powerful body of water knows flooding is a reality and must be expected or planned for. That's the whole point of these dams and the Corps of Engineers' purpose, is to reduce the flooding. It's been successful since the dams have been put in, except for the last couple years. It's imperative that we investigate the decisions, guidelines, and parameters in place to do the flooding to determine if there was any possibility that this disaster could have, and I would say should have been, prevented. We must implement the necessary additional reforms and controls to ensure our flood control system is utilized for just that, Madam Chairman, flood control. The issues well documented in our local papers and some other publications, has shown that either the manual that the Corps of Engineers swears by leads them down the wrong path, which then led to this disaster that we're incurring at this moment, or that they're modeling or they're modeling. There were other weather experts that predicted, one even said a flood of biblical proportions, yet it wasn't on the Corps of Engineers' radar. Something went terribly wrong here. So all we're doing is asking that there be specific language, that they do what is inherent to their job and determine if their manuals, their models need to be changed to prevent the devastating flood that we're incurring right now, to prevent the next one in the future. That's all we're doing with this amendment here. And so at this point in time, I will yield back.
Gentleman from Nebraska yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from New Jersey to speak to his... The gentleman from North Carolina, for what purpose does he rise?
Yes, Madam Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Their amendment is being discussed at this time.
Okay.
Gentleman from New Jersey to speak to his point of order.
Yes, I do, Madam Chair.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Chair, I make a point of order against this amendment because it proposes to change existing law and constitutes legislation under Appropriations Bill and therefore violates Clause 2 of Rule 21. The rule states in pertinent part, an amendment in a general appropriations bill should not be in order if changing existing law. The amendment imposes additional duties, and I ask for a ruling from the Chair.
Does any other member wish to speak to the gentleman's point of order?
I would like to speak.
The gentleman from Nebraska.
Thank you. I tried to make the case that this is basically reiterating already current duties and responsibilities of the Corps, but stressing that they need to look specifically at what causes or what caused this devastating flood. I have to admit that you're probably going to rule that this is legislating, but I got to tell you, I'm extremely disappointed. If we had somebody in the Missouri Valley on Appropriations Committee, they could have done something similar to this in committee, but yet when somebody from outside the committee comes here at the right opportunity, then somehow it's out of order. I just don't know how I go back to my constituents and tell them that the leadership in the House has raised an objection to this study. So I'm disappointed for my constituents. I'm disappointed, frankly, in the fact that something like this that's so necessary and obvious wasn't accepted. I yield back.
Gentleman from Nebraska yields back. Any other member wish to speak to the gentleman's point of order? If not, the Chair is prepared to rule, and the Chair finds that this amendment imposes new duties on the Army Corps of Engineers. The amendment, therefore, does constitute legislation in violation of Clause 2 of Rule 21, and the point of order is sustained. The amendment is not in order. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina rise?
Madam Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. McIntyre of North Carolina, page 15, after line 11, insert the following. Section 112, Section 156 of the Water Resources Development Act of 1976, 42 U.S.C. 1962d-5F is amended. 1. By striking the and inserting a, the. 2. By inserting before the period at the end the following, or after the date of the last estimated periodic nourishment of contemplated in the Chief's report, whichever is latter, and 3. By adding at the end the following, b. Before the end of the 50-year period referred to in subsection A, the Secretary of the Army, acting through the Chief of Engineers, shall, subject to the availability of appropriations, therefore, undertake a review of a project to which subsection A applies to evaluate the feasibility of continuing federal participation in the project and shall make a recommendation to the Congress.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
Mr. Chairman, I reserve a point of order on the gentleman's amendment.
Point of order is reserved. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes to speak to his amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Under the Water Resources Development Act, as we know, is WRDA of 1986, Congress authorized most coastal and shoreline protection and beach restoration projects to be periodically nourished according to a cost-sharing agreement between the federal government and a local sponsor, usually a municipality, for a period of up to 50 years from the starting date of the initial construction of the project. Several of these projects are rapidly approaching the end of that first 50-year period of federal participation. Currently, there is no language in place to provide a process for the reauthorization of these projects. In order for the federal government to remain a continuing partner to protect the people, the infrastructure, the economy, and the environment of our nation's coastal communities, Congress must give the Army Corps of Engineers the authority to assess continued federal participation in expiring beach and coastal projects prior to the end of their original authorizations in order to prevent interruptions to federal renourishment efforts. This authority would ensure that community shorelines will remain safe and economically viable for years to come by letting the Army Corps and the local communities help determine whether or not to continue a shore protection project based on science, on local support, and the standards that the Corps uses for determining whether there should be continued federal fiscal participation and whether it is warranted. These projects are of national and regional significance. Coastal storm damage reduction projects not only support regional economies and indeed the national economy, but they provide critical protection against hurricanes, and as we now are in hurricane season, realize the seriousness of this and other dangerous storms. Federal participation in these projects is determined based on a benefit-cost analysis, meaning that these projects go through a significant study in order to determine that they are merited and that it is in the federal government's financial interest to continue to participate in these projects. However, let's be clear that this amendment would not cut Congress out of the loop, because Congress would always have the final say on final approval of reauthorizing these projects. Any approval for a construction phase would still have to be approved by Congress, so it only makes sense to allow these projects to proceed without interruption. Madam Chairman, I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman from North Carolina yields back the remainder of his time. The gentleman from New Jersey to speak to his point of order.
Madam Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairman, I must oppose the amendment as authorizing on an appropriations bill. I share the gentleman's support for the Corps of Engineers' participation in beach replenishment projects that provide protection from coastal storms for individuals and businesses. Coming from a state with a 137-mile shoreline, I too understand the importance of these projects to local, regional, and our national economy. The amendment offered, however, would add authorizing language to the energy and water bill, and therefore it is subject to a point of order. So while I am sympathetic to the gentleman's intent, I must oppose the amendment and will insist upon the point of order.
Gentleman yields back.
I yield back.
Does any other member wish to speak to the point of order? If not, the Chair is prepared to rule, and the Chair finds that the amendment proposes directly to change existing law, and as such it constitutes legislation in violation of Clause 2C of Rule 21, and the point of order is sustained. The gentlelady from Ohio? The gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Yes. Members and Madam Speaker, I'm having help placing this chart up here just to show how much petroleum America imports, the red line, and overall how much we use, a totally dependent nation. I offer this amendment to help restore the energy security, economic security, and environmental security of our nation. Nothing could be more vital. My amendment takes a small step and shifts a very small amount of funds, $10 million, from the administrative costs within the Department of Energy to help restore funds to solar energy research and development within the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Program. Sadly, the base bill jeopardizes America's new energy future as it cuts research in solar energy by more than 1/3 from last year and over 60% from the President's request, providing $166 million, but that's $97 million below fiscal year 2011 and $291 million below the President's request. The $10 million in reprogramming represents less than 5% of the $220 million administrative budget of the Department of Energy. If they made their buildings more energy efficient, we could shift the funds into research on new technologies. For months I've been hearing from constituents outraged about the high price of gas and energy in our country. And once again, the recent job statistics from the Department of Labor tell us very clearly that every time you have an oil price hike, you have rising unemployment. You can go back 40 years. Every time it goes over $4 a gallon, we get a spike in unemployment. It's not rocket science. As it stands, this bill reinforces our dependence on foreign oil. By contrast, my amendment focuses on a new energy future for America by shifting a modest amount of funds for solar energy to provide American consumers with the new choices that they want. Our priorities in this bill must be aligned with the needs of our nation for tomorrow, not yesterday. America shouldn't be held hostage by future energy price spikes. We must promote sustainable environmental stewardship while creating jobs right here in our country. We need to address budgetary realities, and this bill does it. But there are accounts we have cut. But investments in new energy sources to displace imported oil is not the place to cut, not when America is this dependent. Research investments in solar technology have helped create numerous new companies, creating thousands of high-quality jobs already with domestically produced energy. But we are at the dawn of a new energy age, and we can't lose edge now. Solar companies already employ over 90,000 American workers and are expected to grow in both sales and jobs. But that depends on new research, and many of the fledgling companies can't afford to do that. Last week, Isophoton, a Spanish solar panel manufacturer, announced plans to open a new plant in Napoleon, Ohio, that will create more than 300 jobs. Global firms know that particularly Northern Ohio has made renewable energy a priority, and the investment is following. Congress simply must focus on a new energy future for our nation and not let inertia and the habits of the past thwart progress. Overall, the U.S. economy is anticipated to increase jobs by 2% next year, but guess what? In the solar industry, the number of new jobs is expected to increase 26%, according to Cornell University's 2010 Solar Job Census. Those are the kind of jobs that America wants. And a recent Ernst & Young report predicts the cost of solar to decrease by as much as half, creating a strong solar option for American consumers and providing solar companies with the opportunity to expand. You know, investors know where to put their dollars, and our nation knows that this, or we should know that this is an emerging industry, and cutting-edge research is fundamental to progress. The race to be the energy provider of the future is this generation's space race. And basic research is critical. It is fundamental. It is the fundamental ingredient to build that new future for our people. America has never shirked a major challenge. And we have a real finish line to go across as competitors are fierce from China, from Germany, from Japan. New technology will provide a new power future for us, and we must position ourselves not to be second, not to be third, but to be the global leader and to create those good jobs here at home. So my amendment sets a course to keep the keel more steady as we advance energy security, economic security, and the environmental security of our nation while promoting jobs here at home through new energy independence and innovation. I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of the Capter Amendment.
Time's expired. The clerk will read.
Page 15, line 12, Title II, Department of the Interior, Central Utah Project, Central Utah Project Completion Account, $27,154,000. Bureau of Reclamation, appropriations shall be expended to execute authorized functions of the Bureau of Reclamation. Water and related resources, $822,300,000. Central Valley Project Restoration Fund, $53,068,000. California Bay Delta Restoration, $35,928,000. Policy and Administration, $60 million. Administrative Provision, Appropriations for the Bureau of Reclamation shall be available for purchase of not to exceed 5 passenger motor vehicles. General Provisions, Department of the Interior, Section 201. None of the funds shall be available through a reprogramming of funds that creates or initiates a new program, project, or activity. Section 202. None of the funds may be used to determine the final point of discharge for the interceptor drain for the San Luis unit until development of a plan. Section 203 of the funds deposited in the San Joaquin River Restoration Fund. All unobligated balances remaining from prior fiscal years are hereby permanently rescinded. Title III, Department of Energy, Energy Programs, Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, $1,304,636,000.
Spend. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Ohio rise?
Yes. Madam Chair, I move to strike the last word.
Does the gentlelady offer an amendment?
Yes, I have an amendment at the desk, please.
The clerk will report the amendment. Can the gentlelady clarify which amendment she is offering?
Yes, it's page 23, line 4, dealing with solar energy, movement of $10 million.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Page 23, line 4, amendment offered by Ms. Captor of Ohio. Page 23, line 4, after the dollar amount, insert increase by $10 million.
I ask that the amendment be considered as read.
Is there objection? The gentleman from New Jersey.
A point of order. We don't have the amendment. We'd like to know which amendment we're talking about.
Clerk will continue to read the amendment.
Page 32, line 4, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $10 million. Page 32, line 23, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $10 million.
Is there?
I reserve a point of order on the gentlewoman's amendment.
A point of order is reserved, and the gentlelady from Ohio is recognized for 5 minutes.
Yes, Madam Chair, I made a statement a little bit earlier regarding this amendment, which aims to help restore energy security, economic security, and environmental security of our nation by focusing on the future. And it essentially shifts a very modest amount of funds, $10 million, from the administrative costs within the Department of Energy to help restore funds to solar energy research and development within the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Program. Sadly, the bill overall moves backward in terms of helping America invent its new energy future because it cuts research in solar development by more than 1/3 from last year and over 60% for the President's request. The base bill provides $166 million for solar research, which is a $97 million reduction below this year's level and a $291 million reduction below the President's request. What sense does that make when we're importing petroleum at this level and we continue to use more and more? Prices are going up. It's pretty clear America needs new answers. So my effort is to merely reprogram about 5% of the funds in the administrative budget of the Department of Energy and shift those to the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Program itself. I believe that the Department of Energy, which took years to even get their solar array up at the national headquarters here, could save the money that we need to put into research if they'd merely be more energy efficient about their own buildings, and that comes out of their administrative funds. So this merely is a 5% shift. It's $10 million from the administrative budget, and put it in hard research that really helps to create jobs. We know that America has to invent her future. We can't depend on the sources of the past alone, and technology is critical to that. And in the solar field, the competition globally for patents and for the cutting-edge research that is a part of this sector that is just growing so fast globally, America simply can't slip backward. We just have to keep up our edge. And it's very difficult with China, with Germany, having the kind of incentives that they do in their own country. For example, China even offers companies 15-year tax holidays. And they have so many more engineers and scientists than we do working on this. So I think cutting solar research is not a good option for the country. And this bill makes many other cuts. And we know that research investments in solar technology have helped create numerous companies already and thousands of new jobs. In fact, solar companies employ over 90,000 American workers now, and they expect both growth in sales and job, but that depends fundamentally on cutting-edge breakthroughs in technology. And that is a fight that is being held every day, not just in this country, but in research platforms around the world. I mentioned earlier that Isophoton, a Spanish solar company manufacturer in my region, announced 300 new jobs this past week. So global firms are coming to places like Northern Ohio where they know that the energy systems of the future are being built. But the number of jobs being created in this sector far exceed what is being created in just the general job creation sector in our country. Cornell University's 2010 solar job census shows that in solar energy, the number of new jobs is increasing by 26%. And those are good jobs building a new future for our country and for our people. But we know that many of these entrepreneurial companies are too small to do their own in-house research, and so we know that we still need federal research and basic research to help us use new materials, to help us develop the new transmission technologies, to make them truly competitive, to compete against the Chinas and the Germanys of the world that are taking market share as I stand here even today. So the race is a serious one in the solar energy race, and basic research is the critical ingredient. So my amendment essentially just moves 5% of the funds out of the administrative accounts into the energy efficiency accounts at energy efficiency and renewable energy accounts at the department. So I would ask for my colleagues' support on that, and hopefully we can help take a small step for mankind, humankind, as we move solar energy development and job creation forward in our country. And I will reclaim my existing time.
Time's expired. Gentlelady's time's expired. The gentleman from New Jersey to speak to his point of order.
I insist on my point of order.
Gentleman states the point of order. Is any member, gentleman from New Jersey?
Madam Chair, the amendment proposes to amend portions of the bill not read. The amendment may not be considered en bloc under Clause 2F of Rule 21. Because the amendment does not merely propose to transfer appropriations among objects in the bill, but also proposes language other than amounts. I ask for a ruling from the Chair.
Does any other member wish to speak to the point of order? Gentlelady from Ohio.
Yes. Madam Chair, I would thank the gentleman very much for his thoughtful point of order and would ask unanimous consent to withdraw this amendment, and I have a revised amendment at the desk that I think will satisfy his concerns.
Is there objection to the withdrawal of the pending amendment?
No objection.
Without objection, the amendment is withdrawn. Does the gentlelady from Ohio have another amendment to offer?
Yes. I have a revised amendment that is at the desk, and I ask that that
the clerk will report the
considered.
revised amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Captor of Ohio, page 23, line 4. After the dollar amount, insert increase by $10 million. Page 32, line 4. After the dollar amount, insert reduced by $10 million.
The gentlelady from Ohio is recognized to speak to her amendment.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I would offer this amendment as a new amendment that would perform essentially the same function. That is to satisfy any concerns the gentleman might have about where we are moving funds from and moving them to in the energy efficiency and renewable energy program.
Could you?
The gentlelady yield back?
I didn't hear what, did not hear the question posed, Madam Chair.
Lady from Ohio.
Yes, I would say that I had offered a revised amendment that I would hope would satisfy the gentleman's concern on his point of order. This is a new amendment. It essentially moves dollars from the administrative accounts at the Department of Energy to the energy efficiency and renewable energy program.
Well, I would.
Does the gentlelady from Ohio yield back?
I would retain my existing time.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Does the gentleman have concerns?
Yes, I do, and I would rise to oppose amendment, even though you work very hard to correct some.
Could I ask the gentleman the nature of the opposition, please?
Well, yeah, I'd like to take my own time to respond in a more formal manner, and I would be happy to yield to you, perhaps at the end of my remarks.
All right, thank you. I thank the gentleman.
So, Madam Chair.
Gentleman from New Jersey.
Move to strike the last word. Madam Chair, I rise.
Does the gentlelady from Ohio yield back her time? Does the gentlelady from Ohio yield back her time?
Yes, I would yield back my time.
The gentlelady from Ohio yields back her time. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Madam Chair, I rise to oppose amendment. The amendment that has been rewritten somewhat would reduce funding for salaries and expenses in order to increase funding for energy efficiency and renewable energy activities at the Department of Energy. Within this year's extraordinarily tight budget constraints, the bill cannot fund programs that overlap improperly with the private sector, for one, or that do not have pressing needs for additional appropriations. In other words, Madam Chair, I can't support reducing funds for an account that, especially for accounts in administrative purposes that oversee departmental activities. We need more oversight in the Department of Energy, so I reluctantly oppose her amendment, but as I promised, I said I would yield to her.
I thank the gentleman very much, and I know that the choices are difficult, and I guess I would put my marbles on getting the department to be more efficient in its administrative operations on its nuclear side and on its civil side, and put more of those dollars into research and development. And I regret the gentleman's objection, but I have the highest respect for him, and maybe we can work this out down the road.
I yield back, but still oppose the amendment. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Any other member wish to speak to the amendment? If not, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Ohio, and those in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
Madam.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Madam Chairman.
Clerk will report the amendment.
He's got amendment number 7 that is the same place. You know which one? Is it the one that was printed or not printed? Yeah.
Could the gentleman from California specify his amendment that he is offering?
Yes, it's the amendment to H.R. 2354, beginning with page 23, line 4.
No, it's the big one, so we're good now. Thank you.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. McClintock of California, page 23, line 4. After the dollar amount, insert reduced by $1,304,636,000. Page 24, line 6. After the dollar amount, insert reduced by $289,420,000. Page 24, line 18, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $476,993,000. Page 28, line 13, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $820,488,000. Page 28, line 23, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $100 million. Page 29, line 7, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $160 million. Page 31, line 21, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $6 million. Page 32, line 4, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $500,000. Page 52, line 15, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $68,400,000. Page 53, line 7, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $11,700,000. Page 53, line 13, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $10,700,000. Page 54, line 4, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $1,350,000. Page 54, line 12, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $250,000. Page 62, line 2, after the dollar amount, insert increased by $3,250,437,000.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I offer this amendment on behalf of the Republican Study Committee to save roughly 10% from this appropriations bill, or $3.25 billion, simply by getting the federal government out of the energy subsidy business. For more than 30 years, the Department of Energy has squandered billions of dollars subsidizing research and development that no private investor would touch, with the promise it would somehow make our nation energy independent. Every year we have spent untold billions on these programs, and every year we've become more dependent on foreign oil. We're now running a deficit that threatens to bankrupt our country, and this requires us to cast a critical eye on every expenditure that's failed to meet its objectives. And none has failed so spectacularly as the Department of Energy's subsidy of energy research, which has left us billions of dollars poorer and left us stuck with mediocre technologies that only survive on a lifeline of public subsidies. I'm sure the opposition will try to depict this amendment as some sort of Luddite reaction to green technology. It's exactly the opposite. By stopping the government from doling out dollars to politically favored industries, by stopping it from picking winners and losers among emerging technologies competing for capital, we restore the natural flow of that capital toward those that are most economically viable and technologically feasible. For example, this amendment cuts funding to the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Program, which functions as an R&D department for every solar, biomass, geothermal, and wind energy company in the country. We're not funding the most viable research in these technologies. Private capital beats a path to the door of viable technology. These expenditures are for research considered so dubious that no private investor in his right mind would risk his own capital, and yet this Congress has been more than willing to risk our constituents' capital in the form of their tax dollars. And it shouldn't surprise us that those investments have not paid off. This misallocation of resources not only destroys jobs in productive ventures in order to create jobs in subsidized ones, it ends up reducing our energy potential instead of expanding it, and destroying our wealth instead of creating it. Politicians love to appear at ribbon cuttings and issue self-congratulatory press releases at government-supported alternative energy businesses, but they fall strangely silent when asked to actually account for the billions of our dollars that they've wasted. The best thing we did for shale oil and gas technology was to have gotten the government out of the business of funding it. And guess what happened? Once we got the government out, it took the productive sector just a few years to develop remarkable new drilling techniques that have unleashed a cornucopia of American energy into the market. Is there really any question at all as to which of these models actually work? Let me give you another example. This Appropriations Act proposes to spend $200 million for vehicle technology research. Well, isn't that what automobile manufacturers should do and used to do with their own capital? And if they're not willing to risk their own capital, what right has this Congress to risk our constituents' earnings? These amendments move the government out of all sectors of subsidizing research: biomass, nuclear, solar, wind, fossil fuels, all across the board. Does that mean that research and development will stop on these technologies? On the contrary, it means that all of the distortions that government intervention has made in the energy sector can be corrected, and that private capital can once again flow freely to those technologies that offer the greatest return at the lowest cost. 30 years of government energy subsidies promised to reduce our dependence on foreign oil, and yet our dependence has become ever greater. All we've done is to squander billions of dollars of our nation's treasure and distorted and impeded the natural flow of investment dollars that could have produced far greater returns in viable technology. We're left with a bankrupt and energy-deficient nation while propping up a few politically well-connected interests producing ethanol and solar panels at a staggering expense, an expense that we have hidden from consumers with their own tax dollars. Our energy policy over the last 30 years simply proves that Thomas Jefferson was right when he observed, "Were we directed from Washington when to sow and when to reap, we should soon want bread." Well, for 30 years we've been directed from Washington how to develop our energy. It should surprise no one that today we lack energy. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time.